Buildings have memories. Not in the way people do. Not with sentiment or selective editing or the merciful ability to forget. Buildings remember everything with a cold, democratic thoroughness of walls that have absorbed 10,000 conversations and will hold them indefinitely. Shin Tower was no different. It had heard deals made and broken, threats delivered in whispers, careers ended in the space between one elevator floor and the next. It had, in its 14 floors of dark glass and recirculated air, witnessed the full spectrum of human ambition and human failure. It had never, in its history, witnessed anything quite like Park Soo-yeon. Not because she was loud. She wasn't. Not because she demanded attention. She actively avoided it, moving through the 12th floor with the quiet purposefulness of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of being excellent without being noticed. She restructured the vendor schedule in her third week without announcing she was doing it. She identified a billing discrepancy in the maintenance contracts that had been bleeding the building approximately $2 million a month for 3 years, flagged it in a single clean memo, and returned to her spreadsheet before anyone had finished reading it. The building noticed. And because buildings are really just the people inside them, the people noticed too. It started as admiration, the straightforward, uncomplicated kind that competence generates in people who are themselves competent. The facilities coordinator on 11 told the IT manager on 9 that the new woman in administration was frighteningly good. The IT manager told the legal secretary on 10. The legal secretary, who had her own opinions about the 12th floor's previous administrative efficiency, told everyone. And then, because admiration in a building like Shin Tower rarely travels far before it picks up a passenger, the rumors started. They were not, at first, malicious. They were simply observational, the low-level social accounting that people perform when something in their environment changes and they need to understand why. People noticed that Mr. Kong took the 12th floor elevator with a frequency that his previous routine did not explain. People noticed that the administrative office light stayed on later than it had under the previous occupant. People noticed that Park Soo-yeon, who had arrived with the quiet credentials of someone who scrubbed floors on 13, was now copied on correspondence that had previously been restricted to senior management. People talked. This was human. This was inevitable. What was neither human nor inevitable was Director Lim. Young Tae Lim had occupied his position as senior building administrator for 6 years with the territorial conviction of a man who believed that duration of tenure was equivalent to ownership. He was 51, meticulous, and possessed of the particular brand of professional insecurity that expresses itself not as self-improvement, but as the systematic diminishment of anyone who might, by contrast, illuminate his limitations. He had outlasted 4 building managers, 2 restructuring initiatives, and 1 attempted organizational audit by making himself indispensable through the accumulation of institutional knowledge that he shared with no one. He looked at Soo-yeon the way a man looks at a weather system he has not been consulted about and does not intend to accommodate. It began small. A report she submitted rerouted to a secondary inbox, arriving at its destination 4 days late with no explanation. A key vendor meeting she should have been copied on wasn't. An access code for the procurement system that was reset without her being notified, leaving her locked out for 2 days while she traced the fault through channels that had been subtly complicated to trace. Each incident, individually, was explainable. Collectively, they had an architect. Soo-yeon noticed the 3rd time it happened. She said nothing, not to colleagues, not to her supervisor, not to the 12th floor at large. She opened a new document on her computer, titled it with the date, and began writing everything down. Times, incidents, names. The precise, documented language of a woman who had learned, across years of navigating systems designed to overlook her, that feelings were dismissible, but records were not. She had her mother's stubbornness. She had her daughter's nerve. Director Lim had absolutely no idea what he had started. Mistress Yo had a theory about adults. Her theory, developed over 6¾ years of careful observation, was that adults spend enormous amounts of energy pretending not to know things they obviously knew, and not saying things they obviously needed to say, and not asking questions they obviously wanted answers to, and that this was, collectively, the primary reason the adult world operated with such spectacular inefficiency. She had shared this theory with Mrs. Huang once. Mrs. Huang had said, You are going to be either a judge or a problem, and offered her a rice cake, which Minacio took as confirmation. She applied her theory every Tuesday. The Tuesday visits had become, in the 3 months since the rainy night with the red shoes and the wrong door, something that nobody had formally arranged and nobody had formally cancelled, and which therefore existed in the comfortable permanence of things that have simply decided to be true. She came with her mother after school. She ate whatever had been quietly arranged to be available. The kimbap had evolved into a rotating selection that she suspected was curated, though Jaewon would have denied curation with a straight face. She sat in the chair. She assessed the office. She reported her findings. The succulent had been moved to a better position near the window, her recommendation, implemented without acknowledgement, which she respected. A second plant had appeared, a small fern, which she had not recommended but approved of. The overhead lighting had been slightly adjusted, warmer now, less like an interrogation room, and more like a place where a person might conceivably be comfortable. She was having an effect. She noted this with satisfaction. What she was also having, with the peripheral vision of a child who watches adults the way naturalists watch wildlife, quietly, from a respectful distance, missing nothing, was a growing file of observations about her mother. Her mother was tired in a new way. This required explanation, because Soo-yeon's tiredness had always been a known quantity, the deep, structural exhaustion of a woman running 3 jobs and a household on 4 hours of sleep and sheer determination. Minacio had grown up alongside that tiredness the way children grow up alongside weather. It was simply part of the climate. This was different. This was the sharper, more localized tiredness of someone carrying something they had decided not to put down and had not yet decided to talk about. Her mother's shoulders sat differently at the end of Tuesday evenings. She was quieter on the walk home. Not the peaceful quiet of someone at rest, but the compressed quiet of someone managing. Minacio observed this for 2 Tuesdays before she decided the situation required intervention. On the 3rd Tuesday, while Soo-yeon was speaking with Sung-jin in the anteroom about something administrative, Minacio sat across from Jaewon and looked at him with the direct, undecorated attention that she applied to all important conversations. "Are people in your building allowed to be mean to my mother?" she asked. Jaewon, who had been reviewing a contract, went still in the specific way he went still when something had his complete attention. He set the contract down. "What people?" he said. Not a question. A coordinate request. "I don't know his name," Minacio said. "But my mum comes home with her thinking face on. Not the normal one. The one she gets when something is wrong, but she's decided to fix it herself without telling anyone because she doesn't want to be a problem." She paused. She's been a problem solver her whole life. It gets lonely. The room was very quiet. Jaewon looked at her for a long moment. 6 3/4, he thought, was a profoundly unreasonable age to be this perceptive. It seemed inconsiderate to everyone else. "I'll look into it," he said. Minaso nodded with the brisk satisfaction of someone whose meeting has achieved its objective. Then she reached across the desk and moved the succulent 1 centimeter to the left. "Also," she said, "you need a 3rd plant. Something tall. For that corner." She pointed. He looked at the corner. He looked back at her. "I'll look into that too," he said. And for the second time in their acquaintance, Kang Jaewon made a sound that was almost a laugh. Soo-yeon had been documenting for 6 weeks. The file on her computer was titled Vendor Reconciliation Archive Q4, deliberately, boringly, bureaucratically titled, the kind of title that made people's eyes slide off it without engaging, which was precisely the point. Inside it was not vendor reconciliation. Inside it was 53 incidents, logged with dates, times, the names of any witnesses present, and a brief factual description written in the clean, unemotional language of someone who understood that emotion was the first thing used to discredit a woman's account of her own mistreatment. She had learned this the hard way. She had learned most useful things the hard way. At this point, she considered it her primary pedagogy. She had not planned to confront Director Lim directly. Her original strategy was longer: document, compile, present to building management through official channels, allow the weight of the record to do what her voice alone would not be permitted to do. It was a good strategy. It was patient and thorough, and almost certainly correct. What accelerated the timeline was the procurement system. On a Wednesday morning, 3 days after Minacio's Tuesday intelligence briefing to Jaewon, Suyen arrived at her desk to find her procurement authorization level had been downgraded overnight. No memo. No explanation. No notification of any kind. She discovered it when a vendor payment she had been processing for 2 weeks was flagged as requiring a higher authorization signature, Director Lim's signature, to proceed. She sat at her desk for 4 minutes. Then she picked up her documented file, printed it, straightened the pages with the quiet precision of someone who has decided that today is the day, and walked to Director Lim's office. He was on the phone when she entered. He held up one finger, the universal gesture of a man who considers his current conversation more important than whoever has just walked in, and continued talking for another 3 minutes while she stood and waited with the stillness of someone who has factored the waiting into her plan and is entirely unbothered by it. He hung up, looked at her with the mild, managerial blankness he had perfected over 6 years of making people feel that their concerns were being received and would be addressed and would, in practical terms, change nothing. "Miss Park," he said, "what can I do for you?" She placed the file on his desk. He looked at it without touching it. 53 incidents, she said. 6 weeks. Rerouted reports, excluded correspondence, system access irregularities, and as of this morning, an unexplained authorization downgrade on my procurement account. She paused. "I have timestamps, I have witness names where applicable, and I have the system access logs which I requested from IT on my own initiative 3 weeks ago because I suspected I would need them." Director Lim looked at the file, then at her. He had the expression of a man recalibrating, not panicking, not yet, but quietly revising his assessment of the situation from manageable to requiring a different approach. "These are serious allegations," he said carefully. "They are serious records," she said. "Allegations are what you make without evidence." He was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned back in his chair with the recovered composure of a man who has decided that the best available move is escalation. "I think this warrants a conversation with Mr. Kang's office," he said. "A review of your position and its scope might be." "That's your right," she said. He blinked. He had expected resistance. Anxiety. The particular vulnerability of someone who is not certain their ground will hold. He had not expected agreement. "It's your right," she said again, picking up her copy of the file from the desk. "Request the meeting. I'll bring my own copy." She left his office the way she had entered it, quietly, without performance, without a single unnecessary word. Director Lim sat at his desk for a long time after she left. He looked at the file she had placed in front of him. He thought about requesting the meeting with Jae-won's office. He thought about it for 2 days. On the 3rd day, he requested it anyway, because men like Director Lim, who had spent 6 years mistaking their tenure for their talent, were constitutionally incapable of recognizing a closed door until they had already walked through it. He requested the meeting for the following Tuesday. He did not know it was Tuesday. There was a particular hour in Seoul, somewhere between 11 at night and midnight, when the city had exhausted its loudest ambitions and settled into something more honest, where Jae-won did his clearest thinking. He was in it now. The 14th floor was empty except for Sung-jin at the outer desk, present the way a coastline is present, not intrusive, simply there, defining the boundary between the interior and everything outside it. The city burned quietly through the glass. The fern and the succulent sat in their respective positions, both exactly where Min Seo had determined they belonged, and Jae-won had discovered, without intending to, that he found them restful in a way he could not entirely explain, and had stopped trying to. He was supposed to be reviewing the Northern District Consolidation Proposal. It was a substantial document, prepared by people who were very good at their jobs, and it deserved his attention. He had read the same paragraph 4 times. This was new. Concentration had never been a problem for Kang Jae-won. His mind was, by long habit and deliberate cultivation, a disciplined instrument. It went where he directed it, stayed where he placed it, and did not wander without permission. It was one of the qualities that had made him formidable long before he had the infrastructure to back it up. It was wandering now. It wandered to the 12th floor, to an east-facing window and a woman working late by lamplight, who had looked up at him without startling and asked, with the calm directness of someone who had decided life was too short for indirection, whether he was asking her to dinner. He had not intended to ask her to dinner. He had intended to walk past the 12th floor entirely, take the elevator to the lobby, go home, and continue the process of being a man who had made a professional gesture toward an employee in difficult circumstances and felt nothing further about it. He had been intending this for approximately 6 weeks. He had not managed it once. The problem, and he was precise enough with himself to call it a problem, at least in the privacy of his own thinking, was that Soo-yeon was not a category he had prepared for. He had categories. He had spent his adult life sorting people efficiently into them: allies, adversaries, assets, liabilities, and the vast and different middle ground of people who were simply present without being relevant. The categories were useful. They kept things clean. Soo-yeon declined to be categorized. She was not an ally in any professional sense. She had no leverage, no network, no currency in the world he operated in. She was not an adversary. She was not an asset he was cultivating or a liability he was managing. She was a woman who ironed her uniform before night shifts because dignity does not take evenings off, who raised a daughter alone with the industrious grace of someone who had decided joy was not contingent on circumstance, who had sat across from him at a quiet restaurant and told him true things about her life, without performance or agenda, and who had received true things from him in return without making him feel exposed for having offered them. This was the problem. Precisely this. He had spent 15 years building a life in which nothing he cared about could be used against him. It was a sound architecture. It had protected him from things that would have destroyed less disciplined men. But it had been designed against external threats, rivals, governments, people who wanted what he had. It had not been designed against a woman who simply existed, honestly, in his vicinity and made the architecture feel less like protection and more like a very expensive, very elaborate cage. He set down the consolidation proposal. He looked at the succulent. Minesso had moved it again last Tuesday, 1 centimeter, she always said, as though the precision of the distance made the intervention more legitimate. He had not moved it back. He never moved it back. He thought about what Minesso had said. She's been a problem solver her whole life. It gets lonely. He understood lonely. Not the ordinary kind, not the loneliness of isolation, which was simply a logistical condition and could be resolved with logistics. The other kind, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who needed things from you, and knowing that not one of them was interested in the specific, unremarkable reality of who you were when you were not being useful to them. He had not expected to be understood by anyone in this building. He had certainly not expected to be understood first by a 6-year-old. He picked up his phone, looked at it for a moment, put it down, picked it up again. He typed, "The meeting with Lim is Tuesday. You don't need to prepare anything you haven't already prepared." He looked at the message for a long time. He sent it. The reply came 4 minutes later, which meant she was still awake, still at her desk or at her kitchen table in Mapo, still working in the quiet hours after Minesso was asleep, still being, without anyone asking her to, extraordinary. "I know," she wrote. "I've been ready for 2 weeks. And then, after a pause that he found himself counting, "Thank you for the heads up. And for the record, your office needed those plants." He read it twice. Then Kong Jae-won, in the privacy of his 14th floor office, with only a fern and a succulent as witnesses, smiled. Not almost. Not the first cousin of a smile. Actually smiled. It was, his face quietly acknowledged, long overdue. The article went live on a Friday morning at 7:43. Soo-yeon saw it the way most people see things that are about them, not first, not directly, but through the uncomfortable intermediary of someone else's expression. The facilities coordinator from 11, a kind woman named Ms. Cho, who had brought Soo-yeon persimmons on her first week and considered this the foundation of a solid friendship, appeared in the doorway of the administrative office at 8:15 with her phone held slightly away from her body, the way people hold things they are not sure how to deliver. "Have you seen?" Ms. Cho began. "No," Soo-yeon said, "but I think I'm about to." The headline was tasteful in the way that knives are tasteful, clean, precise, designed to enter without resistance. Love, power, and the cleaning lady, inside Kong Jae-won's surprising new domestic arrangement. The byline belonged to an entertainment journalist named Park Ji-ho, who Soo-yeon had never heard of and who had, it became immediately clear, heard quite a lot about her. The article was careful. Carefully written, carefully sourced, carefully positioned at the exact intersection of sympathetic and damaging that made it impossible to dismiss without engaging and dangerous to engage without amplifying. It described, with just enough accurate detail to be credible, the night of the red shoes. Minasio's entrance. Yuri's departure. Soo-yeon's elevation from service staff to building administration. It did not say anything explicitly false, which made it, in many ways, worse than if it had. What it implied, in the elegant, deniable language of implication, was a transaction. A woman who had been in the right place at the right time. A child deployed, perhaps not entirely innocently, as a catalyst. A powerful man's sentimentality exploited by someone who understood which doors to send her daughter through. It quoted a source described as a former associate of Mr. Kang's, unnamed, unchallenged, and in possession of the specific vocabulary of someone who had rehearsed their grievance until it sounded like observation. Soo-yeon read it once, all the way through without stopping, the way you read something you need to understand completely before you decide what to do about it. Then she closed the tab, thanked Ms. Cho quietly, and returned to her vendor reconciliation. She worked until noon. She ate lunch at her desk. She answered 3 emails and processed 2 invoices and did not, at any point, look at her phone to see whether Jaewon had seen it. She already knew he had seen it. What she did not know, what she spent the afternoon quietly, carefully thinking about, was what she was going to do about being a headline she had not agreed to become. Mineseo had not agreed either. This was the part that sat in Soo-yeon's chest like something with weight. Her daughter, her brave, ridiculous, magnificent daughter who had walked into a room full of armed men to demand basic decency and had somehow emerged with a succulent and a standing Tuesday invitation, had been written about in a newspaper as a prop in someone else's romantic narrative. As a strategic deployment. As a piece on a board. Mineseo was not a piece on a board. Mineseo was a person. 6 3/4. With opinions about plants and a theory about adult inefficiency and a crayon drawing that was apparently against a man's chest right now, which Soo-yeon had not let herself think about too directly, because thinking about it too directly produced a feeling she had not yet built adequate infrastructure for. She left at 5. Exactly 5. She collected Mineseo from school, held her hand on the walk home, listened to a detailed account of a dispute about whose turn it was to feed the class fish, and did not mention the article. At 7, after Mineseo was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the Mapo apartment and typed a message to Jaewon. I think I need to step back. Not from the job. From this. Whatever this is becoming. Mineseo didn't sign up to be a story. Neither did I. She looked at it for a long time. She sent it. And then she put her phone face down on the table because she was not yet ready to read whatever came back, and she was not the kind of woman who pretended otherwise. He read the message 4 times. Not because it was unclear. Soo-yeon did not write unclear things. She was constitutionally opposed to ambiguity, but because each reading produced a different and equally uncomfortable response in the part of him that he had spent 15 years convincing himself did not require management. The first reading produced something cold. The recognition of a threat, not from an enemy, but from a situation developing in a direction he had not authorized and could not, with any of his usual instruments, reverse. The second reading produced something more honest. The understanding that she was right, that she had been placed in a story she had not written and given no credit in the authorship of her own narrative, which was, he searched for the precise word, unacceptable, completely, without qualification. The third reading produced something he did not have a clean name for. The specific, unfamiliar panic of a man who has spent his entire adult life ensuring nothing can be taken from him, confronting the possibility of losing something not to an enemy, but to his own inability to be, at the critical moment, legible. The fourth reading, he put the phone down. He sat in the 14th floor silence for a long time. The fern. The succulent, 1 centimeter to the left, exactly where Mineseo had placed it. The city burning gold through the glass. All of it exactly as it had been for 3 months, arranged into something that had quietly, without his formal approval, begun to feel like something worth protecting. He picked up his phone. He did not type a message. He called Sungjin instead. Mineseo's school play, he said. When is it? A pause. The briefest pause, the kind that contains a great deal of unsaid commentary. Tuesday, Sungjin said. 7 p.m. Gangnam Elementary School. She is playing a tree. I know what she's playing, Jaewon said. She told me for 3 consecutive Tuesdays. Another pause. Will you need security detail?
No.
The pause this time was significantly longer. Sir. No, he said again and hung up. He arrived at 7 alone, in a suit that cost more than the school's monthly electricity bill, carrying nothing except the particular intentionality of a man who has decided that the only available move is the honest one. The auditorium was full of parents with phone cameras and children in costumes assembled with the ambitious creativity of teachers working within a budget. He found a plastic chair in the middle of the 3rd row. Not the back, not the periphery, not anywhere that could be interpreted as hesitation, and he sat in it with the straight-backed composure of a man entirely at peace with the fact that his knees were pressed against the chair in front of him, and the woman to his left was openly staring. Minesio appeared in the 2nd act, stage left, wearing brown and green construction paper arranged into something that required significant imaginative generosity to read as a tree. She delivered her single line, "I have stood here for 100 years, with the committed gravity of someone who believed, completely, in the emotional truth of the material." He heard Soo-yeon arrive before he saw her. The slight change in the auditorium's atmosphere, the way a room subtly reorganizes itself around a significant presence. She stopped in the doorway. He turned. He looked at her the way he had looked at the crayon drawing, without armor, without architecture, not performing anything at all. Just looking, just being, for once in his carefully managed life, entirely visible. She walked to the 3rd row. She sat beside him. She did not say anything immediately, and neither did he, because some things do not require a preamble. She told me 3 consecutive Tuesdays, he said quietly. She told me 4, Soo-yeon said. He looked at her. Then she wanted us both here. She usually gets what she wants. Yes, he said. She does. On stage, Minesio had spotted them. Both of them. Side by side in the 3rd row, exactly where she had, in her own 6 3/4-year-old way, arranged for them to be. Her face did not change. She was a professional. She was mid-performance. But something behind her eyes lit up with the quiet, satisfied brightness of someone whose plan has arrived exactly on schedule. After the play, she took their hands, one on each side. No permission requested, none required. She walked them to the refreshment table where her teacher, Ms. On, was arranging rice cake slices with the frazzled efficiency of someone managing 17 sugar-elevated children. Ms. On, Minesio announced, with the formal gravity of someone making an introduction at a state function. These are my people. All of them. This is my mum, and this is Jaewon, and they're both here because I told them to be. Ms. On looked at Jaewon, then at Soo-yeon, then back at Minesio, who was already reaching for a rice cake with the serene confidence of someone whose business is concluded. She's very organized, Ms. On said faintly. Yes, Soo-yeon and Jaewon said, simultaneously, in the exact same tone. They looked at each other, and Soo-yeon, who had spent 6 years making herself small enough to fit through whatever gaps the world left for her, who had ironed her uniform before night shifts and apologized for things that were not her fault and swallowed her own brightness to keep other people comfortable, laughed. Fully, freely, without calculating how it would land or who was watching or whether it was appropriate. It was the most unguarded sound Jaewon had ever heard in his life. Later, walking to the car, Minesio between them, still holding both their hands, narrating a detailed critique of the other children's costumes, he said, quietly enough that only Soo-yeon could hear, I should have said this weeks ago. I'm not good at saying things before I'm certain of them. And now, she asked. Now I'm certain, he said. Of all of it. She was quiet for a moment. The Seoul night wrapped around them, gold and dark, the city doing what it always did, burning through the darkness without apology, without permission, simply because it was its nature to be bright. Okay, she said. Simply, completely, without a single unnecessary apology attached. It was, in the end, the smallest word for the largest thing. Anne Minesio, who had engineered the entire sequence of events from the moment she pushed open a heavy door in a blue pinafore dress and pointed at her cheek, squeezed both their hands at exactly the same moment, deliberate, satisfied, conclusive. Case closed. And somewhere across Seoul, Shin Yuri was refreshing the article's comment section, waiting for the validation that was not coming, in the red shoes that had started everything, in a city that had already moved on without her. Because that is what cities do. That is what life does. It does not wait for people who mistake cruelty for power and bitterness for relevance. It moves forward, gold and relentless, toward the people who chose, even when it was hard, even when it was frightening, even when it cost them something, to simply be decent. Minasio knew this. She had always known this. She was 6 3/4 after all. If this story moved you, if you believe that decency is not weakness, that children deserve protection, and that the right door is always worth walking through, hit subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment below and tell us, what would you have done in Suyun's place? Only people who think Yuri was right won't.